It's good to see you guys. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Stephen. I'm the senior pastor here. If this is your first weekend with us, we're really glad you guys are here. Man, that song says it all right there. That God does take what feels like the dust of our lives and makes beautiful things out of it. And so I'm very grateful these guys decided to do that song this weekend. I hope they blessed you. It was good for them to do that, man. It was great work. Want to say good morning to everybody watching us online. As we get deeper into spring, there's more and more of those folks who aren't here but watching online. So help me say good morning to our online campus. Glad those guys are with us. So listen, if this is your first weekend with us, one, we're really glad you guys showed up. I know that there's a lot of places you could be today. I know a lot of you guys, if you came on time in particular, had a hard time getting in the parking lot. That is yours truly's fault. Went a couple minutes over at 10, and I know that made it a nightmare trying to get in our parking lot, so I'm glad you fought through that. But we're in this series called Jesus, and what we're doing is just taking a deep dive as we lead our way up to Easter to look at who Jesus is, what Jesus did, and how that applies to all of our daily lives. And so if this is your first weekend, this is a big one. And it's proven to be a big one all weekend long. And we're going to be dealing with Jesus as healer. And because this is kind of a heavy topic, I want to start off with kind of a deep thought time here, okay? And you don't have to shout out the answer, but I do want you to kind of consider a simple question, which is, why did you come to Cokesbury today? Like, what is it that actually brought you here? Now, I don't need to know how you got here, because I know how you got here, right? You either rode with somebody, drove your own car, took the Nike Express, rode a bike, I don't know, but you made your way here. It's not how did you get here, but why? Like, for those of you that came in with a kind of heavy shoulders, like, why did you go through all you went through today to make sure you were here? Like, what drove you? What motivated you to show up to church today? What is the why behind you being here? For some of us, maybe you're kind of like me. We share similar stories. You sort of grew up in the church, and so when the weekend rolls around, you're almost on autopilot, right? You know that, especially on Sunday, you are locked in. You are going to go to church more times than not. And if that's you, that's a good thing, man. And I am glad you are here. We need you guys to show up. Maybe you're here because you're like, you know what, man, I really do want to grow. Like, honestly. I want to see God change my life. I want to experience a little bit of transformation. That's why I came today. Maybe for you, your kids love it, right? And that's why you showed up. Like, I know if they weren't here, you would come anyway, right? But they're here and because they love it, and that's why you showed up. Or maybe it's the music. There is some big league stuff that happens on this stage every week, and it is straight legit. I would put our band up against any band in the entire country. And it's not just an every once in a while thing, right? We get to do this stuff every single week. Or how about this one? We're kind of a young church. We got a lot of people in their 20s and 30s. Maybe you came because you were hoping to meet somebody. Like your mom told you got to step up your dating game and you're tired of swiping right? There's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, listen, there's no shame in your game. I get it. Now, here's the point. There are a lot of different reasons for what brought us here, but there's actually one reason that I think bonds all of us together. And you may be in touch with it, or you may not be in touch with it. But here's why you came to church today. You came because you actually want something from God. You, me, all of us came because we want something from God, and that is not a bad thing. That is actually a great thing. We are here because on some level, we're all hoping that God's got something for us. Some of us are here because we're hoping that maybe God will give us the answers to the big questions that are keeping us up at night. Some of us are maybe here hoping that God's got some peace for the anxiety that we deal with every single day. Because listen, there's a lot in our world, and there may be a lot in your life right now that you would say, you know what, man, it really stinks. And that causes all kinds of stuff to begin to bubble up to the surface. And because precious few of us, nobody teaches you how to deal with anxiety. And because it's there, things like worry and fear, they end up being legit. Some of us are here maybe because something's just not right. Like there's something hurt or there's something broken. And we show up hoping that God really does have healing for us. My point is that all of us want something from God. And so the question I'd like to invite you to wrestle with this morning is really simple. It's what do you really want from God? And then the follow-up question is, what are you willing to do to get what only God can give you? Like, are you willing to keep asking for it? Are you willing to not give up? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get what God has for you? What do you really want from God? And are you willing today to ask him for it? When I was growing up, both my parents worked full-time jobs. And so when school was out, my brother and I, for a few summers, ended up having to spend some time in summer day camp. Have I got any summer day camp people in the house? No, really? Was it just me? Was my childhood more screwed? Oh, hey, good. All right, there's at least two of us. That's all I can see. Summer day camp was awesome, man. They dropped us off about 7 in the morning. They went to work. They came back about 6 to pick us up, and you were there literally all day, every day. And the camp was run by people who were like high school or college students, right? That was their summer job. And if you think about it, that's a long time to deal with a bunch of kids. And back in the day, we actually went outside. I know some of y'all don't remember that, but like we legitimately went out. So when they dropped us off at 7, we came in for about 30 minutes at lunch, but the rest of the time, even if it was raining, we were outside doing something. And so they ended up playing a lot of games because you can only play kickball for so long, right? And then it gets old and boring. So one of our camp counselors in particular, their favorite game was a game called Mother May I. Do you remember Mother May I? Wasn't it a wonderful game? I thought it was horrible. And I'll tell you why. You get this evil and sadistic, power-hungry person who deems themselves mother, right? Like that doesn't have enough issue already. And then everyone else in the game has to plead with mother to grant them either like 3 baby steps or 2 giant steps or maybe 4 scissor steps in order to make it across the finish line. And mother just sort of randomly grants or denies those heartfelt requests until someone crosses the line and then ultimately usurps mother's power. And it basically teaches kids that power is a fickle thing and that your quality of life greatly depends on the mood of your mom, right? And the more I've said that this week and the more I've realized there's actually a life lesson in that right there. But it is a very, very simple game. And a lot of us played it when we were kids. But here's the deal. When it comes to Mother May I think that's how a lot of us end up approaching God. When it comes to what we really want. We play a game of Father May I, if you will. Father, may I have a new job? Father, may I have the resources I need to make ends meet? Father, may I have some healing in my life. Father, may I meet someone to spend the rest of my life with. And if you're in an okay mood, it'd be cool if I met them before the end of my life, right? See, I think we're so afraid to ask God for what we really want. And so just like the game, we end up playing small with God. Like I can't ask God for this big thing because I'm sure he's busy and I don't know what kind of mood he's in. Maybe he doesn't have time for me, so I'm just gonna ask for a series of small things that in reality I could probably handle on my own, but I'm gonna go ahead and give him the credit for it. We play small with God almost as if we're trying to strategize rather than just coming out and asking him for what we really want, which is, God, this is the thing I really need. Like, I'm not blowing smoke or trying to pour sunshine out here, God. Like, this is where I am. Will you do this for me? Even if you've asked for it before, even if everybody else around you tells you to be quiet or to stop asking, are you really willing to ask God for what you really need today? And that's what we're gonna be looking at in the text that we come to. If you have a Bible, we're gonna be in Mark chapter 10. Love this story. Mark chapter 10. It is the story of someone who was really willing to really ask God for what they really, really wanted. And they believed that he was the only one that could give it to them. And so here we go, Mark chapter 10. Here's the context. Jesus is well into his public ministry. In fact, he's coming around the corner toward the cross, and he's starting to realize that everything that's happening here is headed straight toward the city of Jerusalem. And ultimately, it's going to lead just outside the city of Jerusalem toward the cross, and then ultimately through the tomb where final victory is going to be found. And so by the time we get to this story, Jesus had already performed a lot of miracles. And there were all kinds of healing miracles in particular where people would come to him who could not be cured otherwise. And Jesus would heal them in that moment. And if you know the story of Jesus' life, you know that in the beginning he did it very quietly and very privately because he knew that God had a plan and he did not want to usurp God's plan for his life. But by this point, he's healing people very openly. And word is starting to get out that there's something about this particular rabbi, and people are saying there's actually healing power inside of this guy. And that's where we pick up the story in Mark chapter 10, verse 46. Mark says, then they came to Jericho. If we have time at the end, we're going to come back to that, Jericho. So if you're following along in your own Bible, you might want to circle that. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. So already we're learning some stuff from Mark. You got Jesus, you got his disciples, and you got a huge crowd of people that have been following Jesus from city to city to city. And they're on their way out of Jericho, right? They're leaving the city. And so we know there's a guy named Bartimaeus who has been begging. And maybe he's living right there on the streets. In fact, maybe that's his spot. That's where he's lived his entire life, begging people, relying on them to provide for his daily needs. And it's out there on the edge of town that they encounter him. They're leaving. Their work is finished. They're moving on to the next thing. Verse 47. When he, Bartimaeus, heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And I love the fact that right out of the gate, listen, Bartimaeus is not messing around, right? Like he's shouting, he's calling out, he is crying out for Jesus to have mercy on him. And what we don't know is if he even knew Jesus at all. We don't know if he knew anything about Jesus. We can kind of guess that being a beggar and sitting on the outside of the city, that odds are pretty good that as people came and went, that maybe as he eavesdropped in on their conversations, he had heard something about Jesus. But the second that he shows up, that's when he begins to shout, Jesus, have mercy on me. In other words, heal me. Heal my suffering. Heal my isolation. Like, take the burden of my hopelessness off of my shoulders. Have mercy on me. Make no mistake about it, friends. This is not some kind of pretty little prayer that is filled with polished platitudes, man. This is just raw. It's real emotion. This isn't some kind of prayer formula that you read about in some book that's supposed to get results from God. This is unpolished, unpracticed, just sheer desperation on display. And in an instant, when he began to shout to get Jesus' attention, the crowd around him began to notice him. And if you know the story, you know that they took up his cause and they are rallied around his needs and they put him in front of themselves, right? Because that's what religious people always do. That's not what happened. Look at verse 48. Many rebuked him, because we're good at rebuking. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. In other words, they shushed him. You ever been shushed? Don't you love being shushed? Shh, shh, shh. I don't like being shushed. Do you like being shushed? I can't stand being shushed. I'm a grown man, don't shush me. So they shushed the guy in the story, and Bartimaeus like, oh, you gonna shush me? Well, then I'm just gonna talk a little bit louder. It says, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. See, here's somebody who every day is overlooked. And when he's finally seen in this moment, he is seen as a bother or a nuisance. He's the guy that's killing their vibe. He's the one who's rudely interrupting their moment that they were having with Jesus. It had nothing to do with Bartimaeus. He was messing up their walk with Jesus. And here's the deal. That kind of neediness, it's always bothered people. Because most people prefer neat over needy. People like to have things put together, at least on the surface. We don't like it when it appears that everything is falling apart. And if you don't believe me, think about the last funeral you attended. Grief, that's a messy thing right there. And it works out differently for every single human being. One of the greatest privileges and probably one of the heaviest burdens that I carry on this side of the fence is getting to walk with people through death. And I'm telling y'all, every single time that I do this, there is always someone in the receiving line or somebody that comes up after the funeral, not because they're bad people or because they have bad intentions, they just say some really stupid things. Like, they'll tell the person who's just lost a loved one, it'll all be okay. Or God's got a plan. Or don't be sad. She's with God in heaven. Well, that's great. I watched her come out of her mother's womb. I raised her till she was 18 years old. I got her down the aisle. I got her across the stage to get a diploma. She started her family and then she got cancer, and you're gonna tell me that God's got a plan. Or they'll say things like, well, God must have just needed them more than we do. Those are unbelievably unnecessary things to say in that moment. And if by chance, which I know is gonna happen, I'm gonna go before my wife, and if you're not jacked up at me and you come to my funeral, just tell her you're sorry. I'm already gonna be with Jesus because I settled that a long time ago. And again, it's not that these are bad people, it's just we don't know how to handle messiness. That's what we're saying in that moment because we don't know what to say. We're saying, well, I don't know what else to say. But I can't handle the neediness and I can't handle the mess. I like things neat. But not Jesus. This is the same Jesus who weeps over the death of his friend Lazarus, even knowing full well that God has got a plan for Lazarus' resurrection. This is the same Jesus that chose to touch lepers, people who were so unclean that they were therefore destined to be avoided for the rest of their life. This is the same Jesus who became known for hanging out with prostitutes and tax collectors. And he didn't just rub elbows, he actually knew their first names. And when Jesus wasn't there and someone found out they were hanging out with him, they would actually tell people, no, that rabbi, he's my friend. That's who this Jesus is. And his response to Bartimaeus is very different than that of the crowd. Verse 49, Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called the blind man, cheer up, on your feet. He's calling you. And I know I'm a little bit weird and goofy. I'm a preacher. I like theology and all that stuff, but that right there cracks me up. Because before it was like, shh, get out of the way. Man, you're messing everything up. You're crushing my vibe right now. And as soon as Jesus speaks 2 words, he completely changes the tone. And now they're like, oh, hey, cheer up, Bartimaeus. Jesus is calling your name. I was going to come get you anyway because I knew you needed to go see Jesus. They shift from shaming to celebrating. Here's Bartimaeus' response. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. Understand, he's got nothing except maybe that cloak. And so when he threw the cloak off and ran to Jesus, it's probably a pretty messy situation. He knows exactly what he needs. And he believes that Jesus is exactly the one that can give it to him. Verse 51, what do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked him, and without missing a beat, the blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. See, this is the question that Jesus asks. What do you really want from me? What is it that you really want? What is it that you really need that only God can provide? And Bartimaeus knew it was very simple. He's like, I got a list right here. There's only one thing on it. I want to see. I want to be healed. I want you to do what I cannot do for myself. I want you to do what only you can do. And I don't know, Jesus, if you're going to do it, but I believe that you can if you choose to do it. You really want to know what you really, really want from God? Here's what you got to do. Look to your greatest desperation, and you'll find what you really want from God. That's how you discover it. Our deepest desires are discovered in our deepest desperation. Now, what's fascinating about this question that Jesus asks, just a few verses before that, two of Jesus' followers come to him and they're like, Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask. And Jesus is like, well, okay, if you want to treat me like a cosmic genie, that's cool, go for it. He asked them the exact same question. What do you want me to do for you? And their answer was, we want to be seated at your right and at your left when you come into power. See, their request didn't come out of desperation, it came out of aspiration. It's a huge difference. Jesus, I want you to make me bigger. I want you to make me more important. Jesus, I want you to give me more power. And that request did not get answered, if you know the story. But Bartimaeus comes, not out of aspiration, but desperation. Jesus, I want to see. If you want to know what you want most, look to where you feel like you're at the end of your rope. And maybe for you, like Bartimaeus, it is actual physical healing. Or maybe it's emotional healing. There are wounds from your past. There are things that you have done. There are things that have been done to you that you have been carrying with you. There are stories that you continue to tell yourself about yourself. There are lies that you have bought into that affect how you see everything in life. It affects how you see yourself and how you see others, and it affects your ability to trust others. Maybe what you need most from God is for God to actually to provide for you, like straight up legit. You need resources. Like, God, I need you. I'm doing everything I know to do, and I need a miracle. I need a breakthrough. And by the way, it'd be awesome if I could get that breakthrough like straight up right now. Or maybe you need direction. Like, God, I feel like I'm at a crossroads. I don't know what to do with this job. I don't know what to do with this relationship. I don't know what to do in my life. I need your direction. Or maybe for you, the place where you feel most desperate has to do with a level of anxiety that occupies every space of your life. And it fills you with fear. You've got fear about the future. You got fear about this day. It was there when you woke up this morning, and you just feel completely overwhelmed by all the things in your life that you cannot control. Or maybe it's a cloud of depression. And when you look at the world, it feels hopeless, and it feels like maybe you don't have a place in it anymore. See, that's where our deepest desires are discovered. It's in our desperation. And so look at Jesus' response to this in verse 52. Go, said Jesus, your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Now listen, I've heard this story my entire life, and I've heard hundreds of preachers over the years teach on this text, and I'm gonna be straight honest with you guys because I know I'm not alone in this. Some of you get to that end and you're like, go, your faith has healed you, and you're already starting to doubt yourself. Because you showed up today and you know that your faith is barely hanging on. Like if there were categories, you would consider yourself barely saved, which by the way, I don't know if you've been around barely saved people, but I love barely saved people because they haven't started pretending yet. I like people that got one foot in and one foot out because that's most days the way I feel. My grandmother used to say, oh, he's just barely saved. Here's the translation of that, because something gets messed up when it goes from the original language into our language. When Jesus says go, that is a very loaded word. It does not mean go and get, right? Southern Israel, go and get. In the original text, go translates total freedom. See, Jesus was looking beyond the need that was being expressed by Bartimaeus, and he was peering into the need of his soul. So what he's trying to say is, Bartimaeus, you are totally free. Yeah, but what about the faith thing? Because the faith thing's what causes me to get hung up in this thing. Is Jesus saying that the reason I'm not experiencing total freedom in my life is because I don't have enough faith? That's the way I was raised, y'all, not by my parents. But that's the stuff I heard in church. There was a period of my life when I was 8 or 9 years old. I was sitting in my bedroom and I was struggling with this stuff. Do I really have enough faith? And I thought, well, there's a pencil over there on the desk. So if I've got enough faith, then I should be able to make that pencil move, right? It was gonna be awesome. And so I started off simple. I was like, move, pencil. Didn't do anything. So I thought, well, I'm not concentrating enough. So I was like, move, pencil. And it didn't move. So I was like, move. And it never moved. And what I realized is what I was leaning into was not faith, it was a force. I wanted the force, right? Because Star Wars had just come out. Faith and the force are two different things. What Jesus was saying should be life-giving. Because I don't know what Bartimaeus' level of faith is, but what I do know is he'd been blind his entire life. And so make no mistake about it, it's not like he woke up one day and said, you know what, I think I want to finally see. I'll just ask the next person that comes by. No. Every day he's been begging. Every day was a scramble to put food in his mouth. Every single day he had never seen a sunset or a sunrise. He'd never seen another human being's face. And yet because of what he knew about Jesus, he did have enough faith to realize this is the only guy that can give me what I want. It was not the size of his faith. It's the fact that his spiritual eyes were open to recognize that maybe Jesus has got a little bit of power that he didn't have. See, it was Jesus himself who said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed. I don't know if you've ever held a mustard seed, but you ought to get on the Google machine and check that bad boy out because it is tiny. And so what Jesus was saying is it is not the degree of your faith, it's the recognition that I am the author of your faith that matters. Remember where they were coming from? It's the city of Jericho. You know the story of the city of Jericho? Israelites were gonna take it over when they were entering the promised land. It was surrounded by walls, fortified. They marched around the walls, blew a bunch of trumpets. 7th time around the walls fell. What if that wasn't an accident? What if that moment had less to do with Bartimaeus and more to do with the crowd and the disciples, the people who were following Jesus? What if he chose to be leaving Jericho as a final reminder that some of y'all aren't gonna experience what Bartimaeus experienced because you got some walls set up around your heart. You've convinced yourself that you're strong enough to do everything you need to do to get through this life. You've bought into the idea that you are your own savior, and I just wanna remind you that until those walls fall, you're never gonna get set free. See, healing, it's not the absence of suffering, which is what we want it to be. Healing is the presence of peace. That's what Bartimaeus was seeking. He was asking Jesus to literally give him his sight back, but he had no idea if he was actually gonna do it. But Bartimaeus' spiritual eyes were turned toward Jesus, and he recognized this guy's got something I ain't got, and I want what he's got. Even if he doesn't give me my sight back, I'm gonna go to my grave knowing that this is the guy who's stronger than me, and my trust is gonna stay in him. Whether it works out exactly the way I want it to, or it goes completely opposite, I'm gonna keep trusting. I see him with my spiritual eyes, and that's what Jesus is asking every single one of us today who need healing. Because here's the deal, man, there ain't no perfect people in this world, and there's no perfect people in this church. And every single one of us, if we could be honest with ourselves for 5 seconds, we are broken. And we all need healing. The question is, have you put so many walls up around your heart that you're never gonna experience it? What if instead of deliverance from that decision, or deliverance from that diagnosis, or deliverance from that circumstance or situation? What if you shifted that prayer and asked for peace? See, I think peace is the game changer. It's peace in the middle of the storm. It's peace when you don't have the answers. It's waking up after you've been up all night and you've been wringing your hands, but you still got this measure of peace that you don't know where it comes from. It's peace knowing that even though maybe you've prayed about something 1,000,000 times and 1,000,000 times it's bounced back in your face, that maybe on the 1,000,001 time you prayed that maybe God will actually do something. It's still having peace in that circumstance. It's still having a sense of peace even when it feels like the world is completely falling apart. Maybe it's not deliverance from suffering, but maybe it's peace during the suffering that we all seek. And see, friends, I've seen people find peace all weekend long. And what is that one thing that you really want from God? It's that one thing you're thinking of right now. And I know some of y'all are thinking about it because I can see it written all over your face. Do you have the strength to ask one more time? I want you to know the altars of our church are always open, and I've watched people come all weekend long. We've got one song that we're going to sing, and then we're going to be out of here. And I want you to know there's no magic to this. But I've seen God meet people where they are. I think healing is possible because I know that God is a loving God. And I know that he did not put one human being on this earth so that they have to struggle and wander around, fumbling their way through life. I've experienced it too many times in my own life. God's not abandoning you. He's actually waiting on you. But you got to find the courage to do it. And listen, I know some of y'all, man, you got some real stuff going on. Like if we put your story on the screen, man, we would all cringe. If you got something you're carrying with you that you need to talk to somebody about specifically, that a simple prayer at an altar is not going to take care of, all you got to do is walk straight out of the front of this room, go right across the hall to our care room. This is not an idea we thought of last week. Like, we've been prepared for this. And so if you need to talk to somebody, I want you to go do that. You don't have to get in a long, drawn-out, all-afternoon conversation. You just kind of share what's going on. They will pray specifically with you. If you need help, they'll connect you to that help. But y'all, listen, man, I'm just one beggar trying to show another beggar where to find bread. I've chased after a lot of games, and there ain't no game in town better than Jesus. Whether you got your stuff together or whether it feels like the world's falling apart, it's having the faith to trust. So you come now in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.